the mind of Christ and help us through these times. And Lord, lead us to do those things that you want us to do. And so Lord, I ask you now to cover all of us in this sanctuary today, and all those who are not here today, and all in the community. I ask you to send your angels to protect them in this time, and I ask you that these words be yours and not mine. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Please be seated. You know, the Gospel of John isn't always easy to understand. It often tells a story on two levels. Those of us who have studied in seminary call John the sandwich maker, because he sandwiches things in between what he's saying. So let's take the gospel lesson for today. On the simplest level is the story of Jesus healing a blind man and then offending the Pharisees by healing the man on the Sabbath. Most anyone can understand a story like that. At the simple level, it resembles other healing stories that we read in the other Gospels. Jesus heals all sorts of people, lepers, a woman with a hemorrhage, and so forth and so on. We appreciate these healing stories because we know that someday we might be sick. And look for that healing from the great healer, Jesus Christ. And he will possibly heal us according to his will. We need to remember that. You know, I've told you many times that I have worked with people like Christian Healing Ministries, and we've gone out and we've laid hands on people, and sometimes they don't get healed. And we don't have an answer to that, because that's just the mystery. But in the end, when they pass to meet the Lord, that's the best healing that anyone could have. That is the healing. But in John's Gospel, there's usually a story behind the story, a deeper meaning. And so in our Gospel lesson for today, the deeper meaning has to do with vision. Not just the vision that we see, but the spiritual vision. That's what it has to do with. The ability to see what's really important. In our Gospel lesson, Jesus heals a blind man who begins to see all sorts of things. Not only does he see trees and flowers and neighbors and loved ones, but he also sees something special about the one who healed him. So as we move through the story, the blind man's understanding of his vision of Jesus expands and it grows. After he was healed, his neighbors asked, "What happened?" The man was able to say only that Jesus put mud in his eyes, sent him to wash, and healed him of the blindness. But later, his vision grew to the point where he could describe Jesus as a prophet. And even later, his vision blossomed to the point that he believed in Jesus and worshiped him. That'd still be a pretty simple story. But something else is going on in the background as well. The healing took place on the Sabbath. Jewish law said, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. It's in Exodus 20, verse 8. It forbid work on the Sabbath. That was Torah law, God's law, one of the 10 commandments. So when the Pharisees learned that Jesus had healed a man on the Sabbath, they asked whether that was necessary. Was the man going to die if Jesus waited another day? No, he wasn't going to die, because he had been blind all his life. So what was one more day? Well then, is there some other reason why Jesus couldn't wait till the next day? Was Jesus planning to leave town so that he would not see the blind man again? And again, the answer is no. Because Sabbath law prohibited travel on the Sabbath. So the blind man and Jesus would still be in the same place when the Sabbath ended. So why couldn't Jesus wait until sundown, the end of the Sabbath, for healing this man? Pharisees concluded that Jesus performed unnecessary work on the Sabbath, dishonoring the Sabbath, but more importantly, dishonoring God. But still, they had this blind man to deal with. The man whose sight had been miraculously restored. And the Pharisees, they couldn't ignore him. So they discussed the matter among themselves. Probably in the middle of the night. Some of them thought that indeed, Jesus must be a true prophet from God. And others didn't think so. After all, there were deceivers then, just as there are deceivers today. Such people can dazzle you into believing what they want you to believe. They can talk you into buying prayer handkerchiefs and throwing away your crutches and giving them money. They can purportedly do signs and wonders like Jesus. So how can you tell the guys that are telling the truth from the ones that are telling the lies? The Pharisees, they applied a simple test. However good something might look, if it violates God's law, it's bad. That was their measuring stick. Pretty good test. If I'd been a Pharisee in that time and place, I would have been pretty comfortable with that test. No matter how good something looks, if it violates God's law, it's bad. In fact, I would be comfortable with that today. But the Pharisees made a couple of mistakes. First of all, the law about not healing people on the Sabbath was not God's law. It was an expanded law. It was how the Pharisees had interpreted God's law. God said that people should keep the Sabbath holy, that they should honor God by not working on the Sabbath. And over the centuries, Jewish scholars debated what that meant. They specified in great detail what you could and could not do on the Sabbath. God's law never told them not to perform works of mercy, works of compassion on the Sabbath. So it was not God's law that Jesus had broken, but the law that these men had developed. And that was the Pharisees' first mistake. It was a big one. But that's not the only mistake they made. The second one. The Pharisees during that time were important, educated, prosperous, respected, and it went to their heads. I'm sure we can think of some of those today. They assumed that they had all the answers. So they closed their minds to new ideas. They closed their eyes and thought that they were seeing everything that there was to see. That was the second mistake. And that was a big one too. So when Jesus came on the scene, he took a look at the wonderful things that he was doing and labeled him a lawbreaker and dismissed any possibility that he might be who he seemed to be. A prophet sent from God, a man whose word that they needed to hear. You know, it's so easy to see and yet not see. It's so easy to have the answer right under your nose and never even realize it. You know, back in the beginning, before personal computers changed our lives, tremendously. The people at Xerox, they decided to establish a research center in Palo Alto, California. They called the Palo Alto Research Center, PARC for short. They wanted the PARC researchers to look into the future and create products that would lead Xerox into the next decade and next century. And it worked, because the people at PARC invented some wonderful things. Because in '77, 4 years before IBM came out with their personal computer, PARC conducted a Future Day where they showed off their inventions to the Xerox executives. Guess what they invented? They invented the personal computer, and they called it Alto. They also had invented the mouse. You could use their mouse to draw pictures on a computer. And they had come up with other ideas. Networked printers, electronic file servers, and the ability to send files around the world electronically. But the Xerox executives didn't think that that was the future. They were copier people. They had a great business going. What did they know about computers? Who would buy one of these things anyway? Why would they want to make it possible for employees to draw pictures on a computer screen with something called a mouse? A mouse, for goodness sake, a mouse. And why would you call it a mouse? Because mice are pests. If you have mice, call an exterminator. But some of the Xerox executives brought their wives to this event. And their wives loved the computer and the mouse. Many of them had been secretaries. And they could see how the computer and mouse could transform a secretary's life. It would transform the whole office environment. But the executives refused to listen. So they left the computer and the mouse and all the other innovations on the table. So what happened? A year or two later, a couple of young men in San Jose, not far from Palo Alto, working out of a garage, picked those ideas off the table and put them to work. And they called their computer the Apple. They didn't have much money, but their eyes were open. They had a vision. And the personal computer industry was born. And Xerox, they kept on making copiers. And they started facing increasing competition. Soon they were struggling and watching the future go by. They'd seen the future, but they left it on the table. They owned the future, but let it slip through their fingers. Sometimes the really smart people, they're the last ones to see. That's how it was with the Xerox executives. That's how it was with the Pharisees. The blind man could see Jesus, but the Pharisees could not. The blind man could see that Jesus was a man of God, but the Pharisees thought that Jesus was a lawbreaker. The blind man could see that Messiah had come, but the Pharisees could say only, we are the disciples of Moses. Are we ever like that? Not at all, right? Do we miss the obvious truth under our noses? We surely do. The pastor told me this story. I remember as a child many years ago presenting myself as a candidate for baptism. I had talked with the pastor who was expecting me. I walked down the aisle at the invitation. The pastor asked me to confess my faith in Christ and to state my desire to be baptized. Then the pastor did something that seemed strange, even though I had seen it before. He asked the congregation to vote to accept me into membership. He said, everyone in favor of accepting Bill into membership, raise your hands. Everyone raised their hands. he said, everyone opposed, raise your right hands. No one raised their hands. What a relief. It was scary to be a 12-year-old boy in front of all those people waiting to find out if they would accept me. So at the time I wondered why they would take such a vote. Would they deny someone membership in their church? Someone who had professed faith in Christ and wanted to be baptized? I couldn't understand it. During our years in that church, I never saw the congregation deny membership to anyone. So why ask the question? Why go through the drill? It was a mystery to me. But years later, after the civil rights movement was well underway, I realized that there were no African Americans in that congregation. It was a denomination with strong roots in the South. I'm sure that those folks would explain it differently, but I think that the voting was tinged with racism. So whether that assessment was correct or not, the church was undeniably a bulwark of segregation in those days, a defender of racism. Someone had said that 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is the most segregated hour in America. And that's still true. Some would claim that the church's racism proves that the church is not godly. Not so, because Christians are sinners. When we become Christians, Christ redeems us. But we struggle with sin. It's a lifelong struggle. Our relationship with Christ makes the struggle easier, but it doesn't make it easy. But through it all, Christ brings us into the light. He causes the scales to drop from our eyes. He spits in the dirt and applies mud to our eyes and sends us to the pool to wash away that darkness. Sometimes our eyes clear up immediately and we see life in a dramatically different way. Sometimes our eyes clear up little by little as we walk with Christ over a lifetime. For most of us, it's a bit of both. A bit of right now and a bit of tomorrow. But Christ does bring us into the light. It's no coincidence that the man who dealt racism a fatal blow in America was a Christian clergyman. Martin Luther King Jr. Christ gave King a vision, a dream, as it were. And King was able to help other people to see that vision. It was a vision of peace and brotherhood, a vision of the world as Christ would have the world to be. And it's no coincidence that the people marching with King, black and white, were so often Christians, so often clergy, men and women committed to building the new world that Christ had enabled them to see. King's vision came not just out of his bad experience with racism, but also out of his good experience with Christ. Because of Jesus, King preached a gospel not of hate, but of love, not of power, but of brotherhood. And Christ gave him that vision. Christ gave him the light from the light of the world. Without that light from Christ, where would America be today? I hate to think about it. What Jesus did for the blind man so many centuries ago, he can do for us today. What Christ did for Martin Luther King so many decades ago, he can do for us today. Christ can give us clarity of vision and purpose to make life worth living, not to make life comfortable, not to make life easy, to make life worth living. You know, I've said many times when we raised our hand and said, yeah, I'll follow you. We're promised it would be easy, but it's worth living. It's a life worth living. And it can be uncomfortable to come out of the darkness into the light. It can be disorienting. But you know what? It can also be beautiful. Jesus invites us into this beautiful light. Or we can do as the Pharisees did. We can decide that we already know that we know everything we know and all we need to know. We can stay in our comfort zone and continue to live as we've always lived. We can close our eyes and pretend to see. So the last thing I have to say is, the choice is ours. Amen.
Amen.